Long story short, they don't have a clue. Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. How we doing? How we doing? Stephanie checking in with another episode of Class Disruption. And on this episode, we're going to be giving a New York City update, how summer school's going, what the plans are looking like for next year. But before we get into it, smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, hit that bell so you can get notified every time I drop a video. Leave your thoughts in those comments down below and share this video. That is the most important thing you could do. Share this video with a teacher, with a student, with a parent. Let's spread this disruption all over the world. All right, let's get into it. So like I said, this is gonna be an update on summer school and the plans looking for next year. And I thought we would start with those plans. The other day, I attended a Bronx Borough meeting. It was put on by the Bronx Borough president, the people on his team. He showed up, he made his little cameo. He didn't really say much, but it was a space for people to come together. At the height of it, there was about 82 people in the meeting, and that includes like the hosts and the different superintendents that were there. But long story short, they don't know, right? All the plans are still just plans. They stress that over and over again. These are just plans. They're in their preliminary phases. The state has put out their guidelines. The city has put out their guidelines. And now it's down to the principals because each school is so different. There are over 1,800 different schools across the city. And many of the schools are in campuses. Like my school is in a building that has 6 different schools, right? Every school building has different space availability, has different, some are newer, some are older. There's just so much variety. And so even though there are these guidelines, it's going to be about each school building leaders coming together to make those guidelines fit and work for their schools, for their populations, for their families. And so when parents were asking questions, basically their answer was, your principal should be reaching out. They're going to be having meetings for the families of the school, the students, the teachers, to make the plans that work best for you. They need to hear from you. You need to let them know what your situation so they can make your school's plan work for you. And a union meeting went quite the same way. I didn't personally attend the meeting or call in because there are call-in town halls. I went to a couple and they just more or less seemed like a waste of time. You never got to get on there and ask your question. They went on, and I found a pretty good source was More UFT, which is a caucus within our teachers union, and they do a really good job at giving play-by-plays of the teachers union. So I checked into what was going on in the meeting there, and I noticed a similar thing. Teachers would ask questions, and Mogru was, and then more or less it would come out to, we don't know. We don't know. At one point, in fact, he said, if you were to ask me today if we're going to open schools, we wouldn't, right? Obviously, there's still over a month between now and when New York City school plans to open on September 10th. So, right, there's still time to get things done. But as parents were expressing in that Bronx meeting, we need to know plans. We need to be able to plan for ourselves what our day is going to look like. So the union phone call was more or less similar to this video chat put on by the Bronx Borough President's office, in that there was lots of questions, few answers, except perhaps that teachers have even more questions and even more pushback to whatever answers are provided. So I'm going to bring you through that More UFT thread that goes from the play-by-play of this meeting, and we'll pick up on some of the trends and some of the big questions that teachers are asking, and then after that we'll shift into the summer school situation. So this is More UFT's Twitter page. It stands for Movement of Rank and File Educators Fighting for Public Education, Justice Caucus in New York City United Federation of Teachers. Our working conditions are our students' learning conditions. So I generally find them to be pretty far to the left of me on a lot of issues, though we do sometimes align on certain things. But they do really good play-by-plays of the UFT phone calls, town halls. You can see it was on 7/21. And let's just go through some of the things. So president comes on, we have a lot to suggest. And he says right now we're not getting answers, which is probably the biggest challenge we're facing. And he thinks there's a 60% chance we'll be remote. You know, despite all this planning, despite everybody doing this, there's just so many factors. And of course, the union's really pushing on them to make sure safety, and the union should be, right? They should be fighting for our safety and our work conditions, making sure everybody's good. So something that you see often over and over again is about teachers saying, hey, we're not babysitters. And I agree with them in that, you know, if there's a snow day or if there's like a one-off day, yeah, parents need to be able to have a backup plan, some contingency for those days. You know, teachers shouldn't have to risk their life going into school when there's really bad conditions on the road, or, you know, if you're down south and there's a storm that comes through. So that's understandable. But when it comes to long term, I do think that teachers have to recognize that we do play somewhat of a child care role in society. I mean, every day parents go to work and kids come to school. Now, the purpose is for them to learn when they're in school, but we do somewhat have that double duty of looking after the kids while the parents are out there working. Again, it's not our primary role, but it's kind of like this tangential role. Now, if we want to talk about shifting that role and putting it more in the parents' hands, now, I don't think teachers really want to have that conversation, right? About putting the money in the parents' hands, doing more of a voucher type of system, doing small micro schools. Teachers don't want to have that conversation, though. So let's get back to this. Again, I did a video on this the other week, how the union, they just keep harping on this federal action instead of saying, hey, this is what we're going to do here right now. Oh, we need the federal government to save us. They're not acting. They're just fighting, right? This is gaslighting right here. So check out that video a couple weeks ago. I'll put the iCard right up here. Check that out. Saying that we need to be under 5% for our infection rate. Right now at 1.7, we're looking pretty good. But again, we don't have the final plan until the governor says. We have 3,000 educators who applied for medical accommodations. We expect more to apply. But then down here, it says we don't know who's going to be doing what, any type of responsibilities. If you're an in-person teacher, you're going to be teaching kids remote, or you're only going to be in charge of your hybrid. What's the procedures for testing? We don't know. Right, here's the in-person remote instruction. We don't know. So lots and lots of we don't knows. And then another trend that I saw developing here was boop, boop, boop. So here they get into a little bit more about how, okay, so in-person versus remote responsibilities, what's that going to look like? How do we do this? And then he says that's why each school ed platform has to load in curriculum and scope and sequence. So I'm assuming that's going to be kind of like summer school, where we have Edmentum giving us the content and we're not actually creating our own lessons. And they're like, wait, what? We're going to have this centralized content, but then down here, so more decentralization. It's like they want it both ways. They want teachers to be independent actors who get to make their choices, but anytime it talks about decentralization, oh, that's not good. Central needs to control that. Central needs to control this, right? So it says every school needs a building response team to answer school questions. Who's going to take kids to isolation rooms, temperature checks, contract tracing, safety procedures, consulting doctors and nurses for that team. And so he's saying every school needs to have one of these, and more UFTs like, oh my gosh, all this decentralization, right? It's like at some point, the central office does need to hand over to school and say, hey, how are you going to get these things done? Right? And I just don't think that there's a fair balance on that issue. It's whenever it's too centralized, they complain that it's too centralized. Whenever it's, oh, the schools actually have to do something, come with a plan on their own, it's like, oh, this decentralization is not good. And that's just a common theme I saw throughout. And here's another thing about the decentralization. So it's a tweet quote. The tweet says, I was told today by admin we will be responsible for the fully remote, alternating remote, and in-classroom instruction, contrary to the UFT call on Tuesday, which is disappointing. So get ready for the worst teaching year yet. And then this says, again, this is why decentralizing school reopening plans and policies to school level just doesn't work. And my question is, if the policy is coming down from the top, that's not supposed to be how it is, then why would a school be implementing it like that? It's not that decentralization is the problem, because we all know when things are too centralized, then nobody knows anything that's going on. So we just need to make sure at the school level people actually are following these procedures. And then with this whole centralization versus decentralization argument comes in equity. Because of course, when things are decentralized, schools are going to act in their own ways. Some have better leadership than others. Some have access to more resources than others. Of course, there's going to be inequity in the outcome. And the question is that good or bad? Right? Do you want to take, so let me just read this tweet. It says, "The inequity I am seeing in how different schools are planning for September is just staggering. Some schools have PA fundraising for outdoor classrooms and extra staff, and others stuck with the DOE plan, some applying to be mostly remote." And my question is, okay, I get the funding thing, right? Some have parent PTAs. I think the PA fundraising, they have that can raise money for their school. So if they're doing awesome fundraising, we need to get that information to other schools so they can use that model and they can also raise money, right? If some school principals are being particularly successful, we need to take those practices and we need to share them with other schools. Instead of this notion of just putting everybody up one centralized plan, everybody's mediocre, and it just is what it is because, well, you know, if we allow for decentralization, then some schools are going to be better than other schools, and that's just not fair. So everybody has to have this lower level. And that's more or less what I say in response. And that is something that is so obvious right now in summer school. What I mean by that is summer school is being run by Central. In years past, it had been run, there was collaborations between 2-3 schools. They would run it. I don't exactly know how it works. I'm not admin, I'm not on that back end, but I do know that there was a big deal when this whole thing got decided that was gonna be running out of Central. So I'm assuming that disempowered the principals and the school admin in some way, and Central got to be a lot more in charge of what that design looked like. And it's not looking good. I mean, we're now, in the end of week 3, and compared to the number of students I should have, which is over 130 students that are on my rosters, I have about 24 that have logged in and accessed the course material in some way. And of those 24 students, I only have a few that have actually started on the work in any significant way. So, and then in terms of interactions with students, I've had like one student who we had, I mean, an amazing time. Like, that's what teaching is about. He came into my office hours. He wasn't feeling the online course material. So I said, sure, like, let's do some alternative assignments. Pulled up some articles. We had some great discussions. And we ended by getting, you know, because he's 18, I was like, listen, you need to go out and register to vote. I know maybe you're not too interested in right now. You feel a little apathetic towards politics, but register to vote, you know, find out a little bit information. Start getting a little bit more into it. When that day comes, at least you have the option. And that's what teaching is all about. It's about those connections. But the way that it's set up through Central and just like then dished out to the schools, there's no connection. Like, I don't know who these kids are. They're not from my school. Most of them aren't even in my building. Like, some of them are from the school upstairs. I'm like, oh, like, you might have seen me around. And be like, oh yeah, now you are familiar. So Central gave us this program. I mean, first of all, the LMS, the learning management system, I learned. There's some things I like better about it than Google Classroom, and there's some things that I don't, but it's supposed to connect up with our other systems on the back end that has all the student information, their programming, and it just never seems to match up, right? I'll ask a question and the admin will be like, nope, on my side, they're showing that they're discharged, or on my side, this list is showing, and I'm like, well, I still have like some old class list. So there's a lot of confusion in that. And then the content part, right? Because I'm not making the content. The content is being put on by this company, Edmentum. And that, they gave us one really quick training at the beginning before we even had access to it. And it's not like I could go on afterwards and figure out the training, because again, I did not have access to it until like 4 days after this training. And it's really hard for me to know what I'm looking at, how that translates over into the student experience, what are the different ways to manipulate it. And I mean, I've gone in, I've done some different experimenting, but again, not knowing that student facing side, not knowing exactly what it's supposed to lead to, it's really hard for me to properly use and feel like I'm speaking with the system. Since I'm not speaking with students, it's like I'm speaking to a computer that speaks to the students. There's that part, the systems part, but then there's like the actual people. And the way that I'm used to operating is I get a set of directives or a set of guidelines and I say, okay, I need to do this, right? I need to have my objective written on my board, no problem. I need to do that, right? I need to make sure that I have groupings laid out a certain way, no problem. But they didn't say anything about this over here. So I'm gonna make sure that I fill that space. Of course, staying in line with those other directives or guidelines I'm given, but I'm gonna fill that space. I'm gonna take up that space and do what I do, right? But it seems like teachers and admin, they're just so beaten down, right? They're so used to the system saying, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. That they don't try to fill up that space. They're just kind of sitting, waiting around to be told what to do because they don't want to get hung out to dry if they do something outside the system. So again, it's bringing us back to that whole tension between centralization and decentralization, right? We don't want to centralize because when we centralize, nobody really knows what we're doing, but we don't want to decentralize because we don't want to do something that the people above us might tell us that we're wrong at doing. So it's just a whole catch-22 in this whole thing. It's just, oh, we become so divided in our power between the union and the school officials and then the city officials and then the teachers. It's like all these camps of people just fighting for a little bit of power, but nobody's actually doing anything that's for the students or doing anything that's going to make us feel fulfilled of why we got into the profession in the first place. Me, personally, I'm all about decentralization. I mean, that's what class disruption is. It's about, again, okay, I have to do this, I have to do that, but you didn't say anything about this over here, so I'm going to take up that space. I'm going to inch my way in. I'm going to push those cracks open, and I'm going to make this happen. And to be honest, I think that it is up to the administration, the principals, that each school to take those guidelines from the state, from the city, and make it work for their school, right? I know business owners, I know people who run offices, and that's what they had to do. Sure, it is different from schools in different ways. I mean, school buildings have a lot more kids than the typical office building, but there are warehouses that have hundreds of people working there as well. So there's places that have to do similar things to schools or small businesses, right? They're not epidemiologists, but they take those guidelines and they say, okay, how does this work for my business? How can my business reopen safely? How can I get my workers back to work? How can I get my customers back in line? And that's what we need to do on the school level. Is it going to be perfect? No. And that's something that we need to be open and honest about. I mean, we're not going to prevent every single infection. And if I'm not mistaken, that was never the goal. I mean, if we look at Flatten the Curve had the same area under it in both places. It was just one happened in a short amount of time and one happened over a longer period of time. Now, again, we should have safety protocols put in place. If somebody does come up positive, let's have the testing, let's have the tracing, let's, tell people to clear out for a couple days, but those should be contingency plans, right? We need to have those in place, but we need to get over the fact that some people are gonna get this thing. And then the other thing is, yeah, there is going to be some inequity. There are going to be differences in the leadership at schools, and again, in the resources that schools have, that some schools are going to look like they're doing better or are going to be doing better than other schools. But we need to take those practices and we need to democratize them. We need to give access to other schools and say, hey, this is what this school's doing over here, and it's really successful. Like, hey, this is how this PTA has raised so much money and is able to do this for their kids. And frankly, if a school principal can't make this happen, they shouldn't be principal at all. But me, we not stressing it here. We still deep in summer mode. Of course, I am paying attention to the process. I am attending meetings for my borough. I'm watching the news, seeing what DeBlasio has to say, listening to what Cuomo has to say. I'm gonna be in all the meetings for my school, involved in that process, helping in any way that I can, but I'm not stressing it. It certainly helps that I'm young and I'm healthy, and relatively speaking, I'm at very low risk for this thing. But I also just believe in that teacher power. Just like when I'm in the classroom and a lesson goes sideways, I pull out plan B. I go into my teacher bag, I pull out the next tool, right? We're always constantly making it happen. Of course, I'm wary of the system, but we gotta believe in ourselves. And we gotta smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know what you're thinking in those comments down below, and share this video. And enjoy what summer we have left. Enjoy those moments, and stay foolish, y'all.